I'm leaving my career, I'm leaving insurance, I'm leaving this job that I love, I'm leaving staff that I love working with. What am I giving up if I don't do this other thing?
I am joined by Julie Thomas. Hey, Julie, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
What were you teaching, by the way?
Middle school English. And
Ooh, middle
yes,
school. Oh,
12 and
oh,
13-year olds.
you volunteered for that? That was
I
by choice?
I absolutely did. I was not forced. What I loved about middle school is it's that age that none of us would ever go back to. And you're so quirky and you're so lost and you're trying to find yourself. But in some ways, it's what makes them really endearing all at the same time because they still want to connect with you. They're still young enough to want that
Yes.
connection.
Can you reflect back at that age for yourself? What were you like?
I was so awkward. I was so awkward. I
Oh,
was I was that kid who was the goody two shoes who wanted to follow all the rules. I was really quiet. I was pretty conservative and religious at that age, but I wanted to be in with the sporty girls, like the girls who were into gymnastics and soccer. But I was not coordinated enough for any of
mm,
those things. And when you want that, especially at that age, I think that there's this lack of understanding of like, well, why can't I have that? Why can't I be that person? But I think that I started to find one or two girlfriends at the time that just really fit who I actually was. And I finally let that idea go of like, this is who I want to be. And I just need to accept that I am the rule follower, that I am, the
mm,
kid that likes reading. I am the kid who likes, those cheesy little chick flick type of movies. I loved reading Anna Green Gables and different books like that, just like the
yeah,
innocent stuff. I think that once I embraced that battle settled for me.
settled.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that I have to sort of circle back. You mentioned conservative and religious. So you meaning you raised in that environment?
Yeah, I was raised in that environment and I would still say that I'm a person that has faith, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't follow a religion, if that makes sense, like as an
Hmm.
adult. Yeah, that was kind of a big journey for me over time of this is how I'm raised and this is what I was raised to believe, but then this is what that means for me today as an adult.
I guess
Mhm.
I'm just very curious by all your answers, Julie, because you seem like at every stage, no matter what was thrown at you, either through just your environment and family and religion or school, you at some point just realign with who you are and your purpose and knowing who you were. And I find that really surprisingly and encouraging because most of the women I know, we sort of get lost through this path, and you somehow have always been able to get in alignment with yourself.
It's funny. I'm a person that I would never really say I identify as somebody who handles change well. but
Okay.
but then it's what's so funny is when I do talk about my life and the
Uh-huh.
different things that have happened, it is actually funny to me that I do handle transitions and change, I think, better than 90% of people. So I think to some degree there's something within my core, and I think some of it is why I really adapted well to teaching is teaching's never the same day to day. Your kids, your
Mm,
students are always throwing different things at you. And I think to some level you it becomes this innate part of who you are to just have to kind of ebb and flow and go with it and kind of check the emotions at the curb and deal with the emotions later outside of the situation when they're not as like raw. And then
okay.
and then it allows you to process, I think, the change easier because you're not dealing with the emotions in the change, you're dealing with like the emotions outside of the change or like the shift or whatever it is that occurred. And so I think teaching for 16 years, it's just that like constant practice of accepting that things aren't always going to be the same, things aren't always going to go perfectly, there are going to be
Hmm.
things that are thrown at you that are unexpected. And so then therefore it's more like how are you going to react to it versus how it is in the actual moment.
That emotional intelligence is really what you built up over the last decades of
Yeah.
teaching has helped you do that. And
Yes.
do you think that maybe that's sometimes what's missing with women? Like we're just too emotional? Are we not able to sort of remove ourselves from that to be able to see things clearly? Or
Mhm.
do you see anything like that with women in general?
Hmm. Yeah, you know, it's funny that you say too emotional. I was actually listening to this podcast yesterday on the Mel Robbins podcast,
Yeah,
and she
love
was
her.
oh, she's great. She was interviewing this psychologist, and the psychologist was talking about how it is that we deal with our emotions, and that we always categorize them as like, these are good emotions, these are bad emotions.
Yeah.
And when in fact, we should be experiencing a range of emotions. We should, that's just being human, right? Is that we're going to be super emotional to certain situations. We're going to have our own unique triggers. But I think what she really emphasized, and I kept nodding my head as I'm listening to this, because I'm like, yes, like this is exactly what people need to be doing, is you just acknowledge what it is that you're feeling. And her big thing was like, the more specific you can be,
Yeah.
the better off you're going to be able to then navigate what the solution is for that emotion. So instead of just saying, well, I'm feeling really stressed today, being
Hmm.
more specific. I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling undervalued, I'm feeling whatever it is that that feeling is. And I kept nodding my head, because I think when you teach, you have, especially middle school, and they are in the height of an emotional stage,
Hmm.
you learn that you have to be able to communicate with them in order for them to communicate with you. And you have to really break things down into small pieces, especially emotionally. Like, you seem really frustrated with this problem right now, or you seem really overwhelmed with the noise in the classroom.
Yeah.
So I think it isn't that I think as women we feel too many emotions. It's that I think sometimes we don't name them what they actually are. Like, we don't actually call out how it is that we're specifically feeling. And as a teacher, yes, you learn to have that emotional intelligence, because you have to have it for your students, because they don't have it
Right.
at all. And so, yes. And so I think as women, we can just get caught up in those emotions, but I don't think we're too emotional. I think we just sometimes don't categorize them or like pull them apart enough to really know what to do with them.
I remember when my kiddos would throw tantrums or have moments, I would always say to them, guys, use your words. Tell me how you're feeling, like really say. And then as we grow older as women, I think we have a really time, we struggle that either. I mean, for many, many reasons, right? People pleasing, you don't want to rock the boat. You want to be the good girl. I mean, there's so many labels why. And I think the older we get, we sort of become silenced to, or there's a disconnect with really putting words to our feelings. So then we get to sometimes passive aggressive or resentful and like, oh, we're fine, fine. Well, you're not
Right.
really
Oh, yeah.
fine. That's like the worst that you could say, because that's not true. That's a lie. I have this whole thing on social media. It's like what she says versus what she meant. Completely
Yes.
different,
Right. If you hear
right?
the word fine, you're in really big trouble.
Really big trouble. I do believe in this bait concept, right? Julie, the idea that women can be anything and do everything we desire. And the desire part is the big highlight for me, because your desire and my desire are completely different. And how do you feel about that when I say to you that women can bait?
It's actually funny, because when you say that word, there's something like, there's like this warmth in my heart when I hear
Mhm.
that. And I think it's because I have a daughter, and I want her to believe that. Like, not just hear that, but like truly believe that you are capable of learning how to do anything and everything that you want to do in life. Now, I think that there are things that are innately going to come easier to all of us, and there are other things that have to come to us through a lot of practice, right? I
Sure.
know that for me, I love words and writing. Math is hard for me. For me to truly become a mathematician, it would take a lot. Could I eventually get myself there? Probably, like over time and effort, if that's where I really wanted to put my energy. Um, so I think that there are things that are innately going to come along in our journeys that we're going to be attracted to, because it's just part of who we are, and then we're going to do what we need to nurture it to make that happen, to the be all be everything. But I want her to believe that if she is passionate about something,
Mm.
and she truly does want something, that she needs to go for it. A year ago, I left teaching after 16 years, not because I didn't love it. I still actually continued to love teaching. But my husband and I had built this side hustle on the side over the course of 10 years that was just growing, growing, growing. And I had to pause and say to myself, if my daughter were to be coming to me and asking me, Mom, should I make this big pivot from being the teacher who I thought I was always going to be, I was going to retire as that person. But now it's like there's this thing that's pulling at me, and I kind of really also want to try this and maybe be this for a while. Like, what would I tell her? And I would say, it's very similar to what you said, is that you can be anything that you want, you know? And if that means that you were a teacher for a while and you loved it, that's great. But if that becomes something over here that you want to try instead, that's okay too, you know, and that you should pursue that.
It's scary, right? Because here
Oh,
you
yeah.
have a profession that you've been doing and you're very good at it and you've been doing it so well and you said, "You know what? I'm going to bet on myself anyway." What does that feel like and how do you get to that point?
For me, it was little tiny pulls, I guess. It wasn't this big, obvious, like, okay, I need to leave teaching. I had my daughter in 2020. We had kind of our side hustle thing going. I was a full-time teacher teaching through COVID, all the things. And for me, it just kept being this little thought of like, what if I became an entrepreneur? What if I grew this business to the point where I couldn't really like fully give my all in teaching anymore? And I've always been a believer, especially as a teacher, you have to be all in or you need to get out. You know, I knew I was never going to be the kind of person that would be retiring at the end of my career and just dragging it out, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I just, that's doing a huge disservice to your students. And so as I started to have these little polls of like, what could this business be? I started to recognize that pull to teaching was not as strong anymore. And so it was kind of this like this tug of back and forth of like, which way do I want to go? And so for me, it happened very gradually. Like I started feeling that in 2020 and I didn't leave until 2023. And so it was just this gradual step by step thing that like it kept coming around and it kept looping to the forefront of my mind of like the what ifs, what if, what if. And then I read this quote one day that said, instead of thinking about the what ifs, all the things that could go wrong, right? Like I'm leaving my career, I'm leaving insurance, I'm leaving this job that I love, I'm leaving staff that I love working with. What am I giving up if I don't do this other thing? And so instead of thinking, it's kind of like flipping your mindset of like, what could go wrong, but like, what could go really right? And so when I started then shifting to thinking, what am I gaining by leaving teaching, even though it was a massive loss for me? And I talk a lot about that in my podcast, is like, and I still feel very emotional over it today, like leaving. It was truly a job that like, it was, that's who I was. But I had to think about like, what could go right and what was I gaining? And so for me, it was thinking, wow, in the middle of the day, instead of having to get a sub and doing unpaid time, I can go to my daughter's school things, right? Or daycare things and actually participate and be fully present in her life. I can set a schedule that allows me to go out and visit my family in Washington State when I need to versus having to ask for paid time off or only being able to do it in the summer. My husband and I have a very big passion for traveling. Well, now we can travel in the off seasons to save money, which helps us from a budget perspective, right? To live this lifestyle that we want. So I had to really flip the script on myself over the course of several years of not focusing on like, what am I losing or what parts are scary, but what am I now valuing so much that I'm willing to do what it takes to get that piece.
You're now taking teaching, one of your loves. You're taking passion for travel, another love. What you discovered as an entrepreneur. And now you've created a business out of that to provide you the flexibility to do whatever the heck you and your hubby want to do at any given moment.
Yeah.
That to me is Bade, girl. You are living the Bade life. This is incredible. Tell me about your podcast.
So my podcast is called Live Life in Wander Mode. And the reason that I named it is because I love the idea of wandering. It's a little bit like what we're talking about, not always having a plan, like honoring that it's okay sometimes to wander in different directions. And you never really know where life will take you if you're willing to wander and like let go of that control for, you know, a hot 2 seconds.
Yeah.
What I do is every other week I interview women and we talk all about things womanhood, mommahood, entrepreneurship. Um, I've interviewed women. One woman was an egg farmer. I interviewed another gal who decided to start a skincare company that was halal certified because there were so many products out in the market that she couldn't use. I've interviewed a woman who started a Montessori school. It's the conversations have been incredible, and it allows me to wander through all these topics with different women and hear their stories. And the response that I've been getting is just, wow, this episode really resonated with me because dot dot dot. And it goes to show that we're all in very different places in life, but we do have these connections that allow us to really build community with one another, depending on what stage of life we're in, or like what pillar of our life is at the forefront in that moment.
Tell everyone how to find you. I'm going to include all this on the show notes, but give us your handles and how do people work with you?
So the best way to find me from a rentals or coaching perspective is at Wanderful Rentals. So WANDERFUL Rentals.
Okay.
And you can get access to, through our bio, the links for our coaching and our workshops, and just a lot of free information to write on Instagram. And if you want to follow my podcast, you can just go to at Wander Mode Co. So WANDERMODE Co. And that has all my podcast information on there, and then more of me from my personal life side as well. So I kind of dump a lot of me as a mom, as an entrepreneur in there, a little less so on my rentals website.
I'm excited to follow you and see what's in your next chapter, and just really excited for you and really proud of you for doing your thing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It was really an honor to chat with you today.